Hello there, and welcome wherever you may be. Later on we'll hear from Gurdjieff talking about single-channel self-observation, and I'll discuss what he meant by the ready-madeness of the higher centers. It is difficult to comprehend a world quite as broken as ours. If mankind is stationary at the fifth step in the octave, the situation is quite different if you're ascending than if you're collapsing from a great height. In the situation of a collapsing society, you are surrounded by material, some of it still living, systems and ideas and people who have something in them that still exists, and it gives rise to many illusions. In the end, Gurdjieff said that he had little faith in anyone or anything. A lot of dead wood has to be cut away, because it is fool's gold. Gurdjieff was attempting to lead us back somewhere quite unknown, back to Mount Olympus, where the gods live. Gods being men who are free. He said that in learned societies of the ancient days, that each three-brained being would select for himself some aspect of the cosmos to study, and that these branches of studies reflected the stops in the octave, perhaps like the figures in the zodiac do, and that is what the branches of scientific study should be. But this studying of the ancient ones had little in common with what we call today the university, of which Gurdjieff said, "This establishment, a university, is a stove in which everything acquired by beings of that planet during tens of centuries is burned up, and where that day and a half tasty lentil soup is cooked to take its place." And the legends of the ancient gods, what do they really mean? Well, I've picked out a few here. There is Diana, the goddess of the hunt in the wilderness. There is Apollo, god of the sun, of light and prophecy. Demeter, the goddess of the harvest, fertility and agriculture. And of course, Mars, the god of war. Gurdjieff said, "I often regretted having begun too late to give the legends of antiquity the immense significance that I now understand they really have." And consider this, 2000 years ago, at the birth of the Christian calendar, the population of men on the earth was only 200 million, and today it is 40 times more than that, and 40 times less. But I see again that nobody is coming to save us, neither in the current Western civilization nor on planet Earth, and that although we are bequeathed a certain amount of ancient wisdom if you know where to look, surely there were many things that even they did not understand for the world to look the catastrophic mess that it currently does. Gurdjieff describes how ancient wisdom reaches us today. Legomenism, Beelzebub replied, is the name given to one of the means used for transmitting from generation to generation information about certain events of long past ages through those three-brained beings who have become worthy to be and to be called initiates. This means of transmitting information has been devised by the beings of the continent of Atlantis. For your better understanding of how information can be transmitted to beings of succeeding generations by means of a legomenism, I must tell you a little about those beings whom other beings there called initiates. In former times on the planet Earth, this word was used in one sense only. Those three-brained beings were called initiates who had acquired in their presence almost identical objective data, which could be sensed by other beings. Well then, my boy, legomenism is the name given to the successive transmission of information about long past events on the planet Earth from initiate to initiate of the first kind, that is, between really meritorious beings. And for this means of transmitting information we must give the beings of the continent of Atlantis their due. It was a very wise device and did indeed attain their aim. It is in fact the sole means by which information about certain events of long ago has accurately reached beings of later generations. As for the information that passes from generation to generation through the mass of ordinary beings of that planet, either it disappears and is completely forgotten, or, as our dear Mullah Nasruddin says, all that is left of it is skin and bones, and tales for Scheherazade. But it was said that Atlantis was swallowed whole into the oceans of the earth, and only a few scattered survivors remained. And I question to myself how great they could have been, although it seems today that even the ladybird is great compared to the men of this age. Let's hear Gurdjieff talking about single-channeled self-observation. He says, having fixed in his own mind the difference between the intellectual, the emotional, and the moving functions, a man must, as he observes himself, immediately refer his impressions to this or that category. And at first he must take mental note of only such observations as regards which he has no doubt whatever, that is, those where he sees at once to what category they belong. He must reject all vague or doubtful cases, and remember only those which are unquestionable. If the work is carried on properly, the number of unquestionable observations will rapidly increase, and that which seemed doubtful before will clearly be seen to belong to the first, the second, or the third centre. Each centre has its own memory, its own associations, its own thinking. At the same time, as we watch the work of the centres, we shall observe side by side with their right working, their wrong working, that is, the working of one centre for another, the attempts of the thinking centre to feel, or to pretend that it feels, the attempts of the emotional centre to think, the attempts of the moving centre to think and feel. As has been said already, one centre working for another is useful in certain cases, for it preserves the continuity of mental activity. But in becoming habitual, it becomes at the same time harmful, since it begins to interfere with right working by enabling each centre to shirk its own direct duties, and to do not what it ought to be doing, but what it likes best at the moment. In a normal, healthy man, each centre does its own work, that is, the work for which it was specially designed, and which it can best perform. There are situations in life which the thinking centre alone can deal with and can find a way out of. If at this moment the emotional centre begins to work instead, it will make a muddle of everything, and the result of its interference will be most unsatisfactory. In an unbalanced kind of man, the substitution of one centre for another goes on almost continually, and this is precisely what being unbalanced or neurotic means. Each centre strives, as it were, to pass its work on to another, and at the same time it strives to do the work of another centre for which it is not fitted. The emotional centre, working for the thinking centre, brings unnecessary nervousness, feverishness, and hurry into situations where, on the contrary, calm judgment and deliberation are essential. The thinking centre, working for the emotional centre, brings deliberation into situations which require quick decisions, and makes a man incapable of distinguishing the peculiarities and the fine points of the position. Thought is too slow. A 100 years ago, when Gurdjieff wrote that the world was not filled as it is today with psychotherapy, and people were simpler and cleaner. The situation is quite different today. Gurdjieff says somewhere that the emotional centre is a very subtle instrument, and in fact all our centres are subtle instruments, but who takes any interest in them really? It's hard to remember to value yourself in a world that has faded away. And I was standing by the kitchen sink the other day, thinking to myself how ridiculous scientific materialism is, because as I stood there, what is it that I experience? What is this life? It is only feelings. There is nothing here but feelings. Everything that I experience, I would say, is a feeling, even the colour of the tiles on the wall. Meanwhile, the great and the good are terribly frightened that we're running out of molecules of one or another kind. We're running out of resources. But after the delusion of their scientific thinking, so-called, vanishes, after their meetings end, they return to the real world, which is all feeling, which is also a resource, which is subtle, powerful. We live in a world filled with feelings and moods, of energies. But who knows? If I see something in the distance, I do not translate it from a visual impression into the word wooden door. That's not what happens. I feel it at a distance. I can feel at a distance the difference between a brick wall, a wooden door, and a metal tap. I can feel it from here. I sense the different material. We all do. If somebody walks into a restaurant and they choose the table on the right or the table on the left, why did they do that? They experience many things and they never talk about it. Instead, they talk about the news. They do not know their life. When Gurdjieff talks about our higher possibilities, he says some interesting things. The reason why it is possible for four bodies to exist is that the human organism, that is, the physical body, has such a complex organization that under certain conditions a new independent organism can grow in it, affording a much more convenient and responsive instrument for the activity of consciousness than the physical body. To enter the possibilities of the real human, of the real man, you have to enter inside here to begin with. And you have to do that in a world that is ground in coarseness. Very difficult. Gurdjieff says, the existence of these higher centers in us is a greater riddle than the hidden treasure which men who believe in the existence of the mysterious and the miraculous have sought since the remotest times. All mystical and occult systems recognize the existence of higher forces and capacities in man, although in many cases they admit the existence of these forces and capacities only in the form of possibilities, and speak of the necessity for developing the hidden forces in man. This present teaching differs from many others by the fact that it affirms that the higher centers exist in man and are fully developed. It is the lower centers that are undeveloped, and it is precisely this lack of development or the incomplete functioning of the lower centers that prevents us from making use of the work of the higher centers. But what does Gurdjieff mean by this? I think the meaning is relatively easy. First of all, he's making a comparison here. Man chases after fool's gold, always thinking about the next step, and he does not question whether he himself today, right here, is insincere. He considers the problem to be what he hasn't got rather than what he has already, which is in a fallen state. And as for the two centers at the end of the octave, of course they obey the Enneagram. And in the three regions of the Enneagram, different types of work have to be performed. And this makes things very difficult, because most people can only work in one way, normally only the first way, through force and effort, which is appropriate only for the beginning. But when you reach the upper slopes of a mountain, the atmosphere changes completely, and the means of climbing as well. And development continues, but it continues through a completely different mechanism. I think I'll finish with something from Julius Evola, where he reads out certain ancient texts on the Kali Yuga. I will now describe some of the features found in the Kali Yuga that are found in the ancient Hindu text, the Vishnu Purana. Outcasts and barbarians will be masters of the banks of the Indus, Darvika, the Chandrabhaga and Kashmir. These will all be contemporary rulers reigning over the earth, kings of violent temper. They will seize upon the property of their subjects. They will be rulers of limited personal ability and will for the most part rapidly rise and fall. Their lives will be short, their desires insatiable, and they will display but little piety. The people of various countries intermingling with them will follow their example. The prevailing caste will be the Shudra. Vaisyas will abandon agriculture and commerce and gain a livelihood by servitude or the exercise of the mechanical arts. Kshatriyas, instead of protecting, will plunder their subjects and under the pretext of levying customs will rob merchants of their property. True wealth and piety will decrease day by day until the whole world will be wholly depraved. Then property alone will confer rank. Material wealth will be the only source of devotion. Passion will be the sole bond of union between the sexes. Falsehood will be the only means of success in litigation. Earth will be venerated only for its mineral treasures. Brahmanical clothes will constitute a Brahman. Weakness will be the cause of dependence. In this Kali age, men corrupted by the unbelievers will say, "Of what authority are the Vedas? What are gods or Brahmins?" Observance of castes, of order, of traditional institutes will not prevail in the Kali age. Marriages in this age will not be conformable to the ritual, nor will the rulers that connect the spiritual preceptor and his discipline be in force. A regenerated man will be initiated in any way whatever, and such acts of penance as may be performed will be unattended by any result. All orders of life will be common alike to all persons. He who gives away much money will be the master of men, and family descent will no longer be a title of supremacy. Men will fix their desires upon riches, even though dishonestly acquired. Men of all degrees will conceit themselves to be equal with Brahmins. The people will be almost always in dread of death and apparently of scarcity, and will hence ever be watching the appearance of the sky. The women will pay no attention to the commands of their husbands or parents. They will be selfish, abject and slatternly. They will be scolds and liars. They will be indecent and immoral in their conduct, and will ever attach themselves to dissolute men. Men having deviated into heresy and iniquity will flourish, and the duration of life will therefore decrease. Evola says, nevertheless, in the Vishnu Purana, there are also references to elements of the primordial race that have been preserved in this dark age in order to be the seed of new generations. What appears again is the well-known idea of a new and final epiphany from above. When the practices taught by the Vedas in the institutes of law shall nearly have ceased, and the close of the Kali age shall be nigh, a portion of that divine being who exists of his own spiritual nature in the character of Brahma, and who is the beginning and the end, and who comprehends all things, shall descend upon earth. He will then re-establish righteousness upon earth, and the minds of those who live at the end of the Kali age shall be awakened, and shall be as lucid as crystal. The men who are thus changed by virtue of that particular time shall be as the seeds of new human beings, and shall give birth to a race who shall follow the laws of the age of purity. Okay then, you take care.